The big question every pre-retiree or newly retiree individual or couple wants answered is, how much can I afford to spend in retirement, especially early on in retirement when I'm younger and healthier and have the ability to do and experience more without causing any sort of long-term harm to my retirement and the ability to pay myself an income later on in life? That question has been answered over the last handful of decades many different ways. There have been rules of thumb like the 4% rule, where if you only withdraw 4% of your portfolio every single year, you shouldn't have any problems in retirement. Or rules of thumb, hey, if you just take your dividends or interest earned in your portfolio every single year and not touch the principal, everything will work out just fine. And although those rules of thumb work for some people, most often they end up forcing retirees to spend less than they actually have the ability to. And for many people, the worst thing they could experience in retirement is getting later into retirement and running out of money. The second worst thing most people experience, which is far more common than running out of money, is regret later in life because they didn't do more while they were younger and healthier because they didn't think they could afford it. So how much money can you spend in retirement confidently? Well, the answer to that is probably more than you think if you take advantage of the superpower every retiree, regardless of your financial situation, has the ability to take advantage of, and that is income adjustments. You having the ability to adjust your income, especially when times are bad, tighten your belt temporarily, knowing that that temporary income cut is going to increase the long-term viability of your retirement. Let's just say you're on a road trip. You're going across the country and you're halfway to your destination, and all of a sudden your car starts to rattle, smoke starts coming from the hood, and you pull into a mechanic shop. And the mechanic says, I know exactly what's wrong. You're going to have to pay a little bit more. You're going to have to spend the night so I get a chance today to fix the car, but we'll have you back on the road tomorrow morning. So you do just that. You get a hotel room. You return to the mechanic shop the next morning. The car is ready to go. You hop in, and a couple days later, you make it to your final destination. It wasn't a perfect scenario, and there was a temporary inconvenience in the middle, the issues with your car. But in the end, you accomplish your final goal, making it safely to your final destination. That is very similar to retirement, where you could start out in retirement, spend your money confidently, and then all of a sudden an economic situation plays out that you weren't anticipating, forcing you to take a step back, temporarily cutting your income for a small amount of time until things get better, and then resuming what you were doing before throughout the remainder of your retirement. Yes, there was a temporary inconvenience in the middle, but that is a trade-off many retirees will take in order to ensure that the long-term viability and the long-term goals they have in retirement come true. So when we talk about income cuts, the important thing you have to remember is there is a certain degree of risk that each individual retiree is comfortable with, and that risk is associated with the probability of them having to take an income cut a specific amount of times in retirement. Let's take a look at a visual that helps explain this a little bit better. So I think this visual does a wonderful job explaining what can I spend in retirement. Now, the first thing you need to understand is if you're a retiree, you are always doing one of two things at any given time. And that is you are always either underspending your plan, which means you have $20 million to your name, but you only think you can spend $30,000 a year. You're underspending what your financial resources dictate you can spend. On the flip side of that coin, you may be overspending your plan. That could be somebody who has $200,000 to their name, but they want to spend $90,000 a year for the next 30 years. It just isn't realistic. You're going to run out of money. For most pre-retirees and newly retiree individuals, they find themselves somewhere on the spectrum. And on each end of the spectrum, we have guardrails set up that tell us if you're moving too far in one direction or the other, we're going to know it, and we're going to adjust your income, either cut your income or increase the amount of money you can spend in order to reduce the risk of you either underspending your plan long term or overspending your term. And when it comes to pre-retirees, it's very important to determine what level of risk you're comfortable with starting out in retirement. Are you somebody who wants an 80% probability of underspending your plan, which gives you a 20% probability of overspending your plan? In that situation, you are creating a bigger buffer between you and a potential guardrail, which would force you to have to temporarily cut your income at that point in time. It would also put you closer to that upper guardrail that says, hey, your financial resources dictate you can actually spend more than you think or more than you want. So let's increase that spending or have a more focused conversation on estate planning, gifting, charitable contributions, whatever else is important to you at that time. And then as you go along in retirement, these risk parameters will adjust over time based off of the way you spend your money and the economic environment, the rates of return experiences and inflation we run into over a 25, 35-year retirement. And you will always know where you sit on this risk spectrum. So you never have to worry about taking unknown too much risk or taking too little risk, where you have regret later in life by not spending more than you could, or you run into the stress and uncertainty of running low on funds later in retirement and having to make huge unwanted income adjustments later on in life because you failed to make small adjustments earlier in retirement. So what does this look like in practice? Let's take a look at an example of a retired couple. They have $1.74 million and their guardrail and spending situation looks like this, where we know with a high level of certainty that if their $1.7 million drops to $1.2 million, they will need to take a 4% income cut. So their portfolio would have to drop by almost 30%, either because investment markets performed really poorly or because they spend way more than they think they were going to spend to start retirement. But that's okay, because this bottom guardrail tells us if that risk of overspending increases too much, we're going to know it and we're going to be able to temporarily cut your income to get you back within the risk parameters that you're more comfortable with. And the same situation applies on the upside, where if your income portfolio or your investment portfolio increases 23% and your $1.7 million gets up to 2.1, well, now we know that we have the ability to increase your income by 20% in order to avoid the risk of underspending long term and regret not spending more of your money earlier in life when you have the ability to, which is important for a lot of retirees. Now, the next question a lot of people ask is, how do I know where I'm starting? And if I have a greater tolerance for risk, meaning I have the ability to cut my income more often in retirement, giving me the ability to spend more earlier, what does that look like? Well, in this situation, this individual is starting at an 80% risk of underspending their plan and a 20% risk of overspending their plan. So they are sitting in a very, very conservative position where, in my opinion, 80% of the time, according to the analysis, they're going to be underspending their plan, and 20% of the time they'll be overspending it. So they have a big buffer here before they get to that bottom guardrail. But what would it look like if they had the ability to adjust their income more easily, and they're willing to do it when certain economic conditions play out, and they want to be more aggressive with their spending earlier on in retirement, meaning that they push their risk of underspending to 60% and their risk of overspending to 40%. Well, it says they can spend $88,000 this year, but if they're able to move these parameters farther over into the overspending zone, where now they're at 40 and now they're at 60, where before they were at 80 and 20, meaning that their risk of underspending and hitting that guardrail, that bottom guardrail, more often increases. Well, it gives them the ability to spend from $88,000 up to $111,000 that first year in retirement. So it's important to understand that when you're trying to answer the question, what can I afford to spend in retirement? The good news is it's probably more than you think, especially if you believe you have the ability in retirement to temporarily adjust your income when certain economic conditions dictate that you need to. If you're somebody who says, "Dear, I don't want to adjust my income at all. I don't want to worry about that. I want to be more conservative. I want to be far more from a percentage standpoint on the underspending side than the overspending side." Well, the trade off of that is you're probably going to have to start at a smaller or lower income number compared to somebody who has the ability to take on more risk. And that ability to take on more risk is directly correlated with things like not having any debt in retirement. If you don't have any debt payments because everything's paid off, your income flexibility and tolerance is probably a lot higher than somebody who doesn't. So when answering the question, what can I spend in retirement? It all goes back to what is your ability to handle minor inconveniences and income cuts in retirement? And if your risk of handling that and being able to execute that more commonly in retirement, the ability to spend more earlier in retirement is higher for you than somebody whose risk of income adjustments is a lot lower. And then monitoring this plan continuously throughout retirement is going to provide you with enough or the biggest amount of confidence and the lowest amount of stress, knowing that you are always spending what you have the ability to spend without worrying about long-term, am I hurting the long-term viability of my future retirement? This is complicated stuff, but this is the foundation of true retirement planning and true financial success in retirement. So if you're somebody who says, "There, this is exactly what I need," I'd be happy to share more with you about how I utilize this with my retiree clients when it comes to their retirement. Just click on the link below, schedule your free consultation, and I'd be happy to chat for 20 to 30 minutes about your specific situation to see if what we talked about today could or could not provide benefit to you long term. Until that future conversation, happy retirement planning.